So the NBA is currently out of control, and it's really a shame because this last season, and I know that I'm not the only one, this last season brought a lot of people back in because of the on the court stuff that was going on in the NBA, which we had a Knicks run that was historic, and it seemed like every game, not just the Knicks, were appointment TV and a lot of people enjoyed it. But unfortunately, what we've got going on right now is a lot of controversy, and you know, it has nothing to do with load management. It has nothing to do with officiating or TV ratings. It's much bigger than that, and it's federal investigations, fraud schemes, ghost contracts, and ownership groups that look more like geopolitical alliances than actual ownership groups, or that we're used to seeing. Two of the league's franchises, one crown jewel, the Lakers and the Los Angeles Clippers, are knee deep in chaos, and the league office, they're just hoping that this gets swept under the rug. It's very evident, and they're hoping nobody notices, and it's just not going away. Not today, not on this show, not on the Four League Report, because we're going to talk about what's really happening, and it's bigger than anything that you've probably heard on ESPN or FS1 or anywhere else, because this is boardroom warfare. This is courtroom drama. This is the NBA losing control of its own league. Let's get into it. All right, the Lakers. This was a situation or it has been a situation the last few years that has just been really crazy. I mean, let's start with before they sold to Mark Walters. The ownership group of Jeannie Buss and her brothers, officially ate itself from the inside. So they imploded, the Buss family, the dynasty that ran this franchise for decades. They didn't just lose the team, as I said, they self-destructed. The Jeannie Buss firing every sibling after the first sale closed with Mark Walters. Joey, Jesse, Jim, Johnny, Janie, all gone. And if you read Baxter Holmes of ESPN, this wasn't just business, it was personal. This was resentment, betrayal, a coup attempt, lawsuits. One phone call where Jeannie told her younger brother Jesse, quote, "You shouldn't have been born." Obviously, folks, we're not here to celebrate this. We're just reporting on a timeline here because it's been absolute chaos. So, obviously not a functional ownership group, right? And it became a powder keg, and then the powder keg blew up, created a vacuum, and into that vacuum walked Mark Walter. So, the red flag that the NBA ignored and was not really well reported on, in my opinion, bought the Lakers last year at a $10 billion valuation, highest price ever paid for a sports team at the time. And the part that the NBA just hasn't, or doesn't want you to know is that Walter did this while his financial empire was under federal investigation. It's not a rumor. That's not speculation. This is well documented. Federal prosecutors and the SEC were investigating and are still investigating private credit deals involving loans from Walter's insurance companies being passed through a third party to companies tied to him. His insurers reclassified billions in loans as affiliated. Subpoenas were issued. Regulatory filings admitted errors, and according to Bloomberg, the FBI seized Walter's cell phone and computer. Folks, you don't get your phone and your computer seized by the FBI and then by the Lakers like you're picking up milk at the grocery store. And the NBA, they rubber stamped the sale like it was a season league scrimmage. You know, no hearings, no transparency, no questions. 3 weeks later, Walter fires every Buss sibling except Jeannie. You know, that's not a transition, you know, that's a purge. And then this is where the story goes from strange to unbelievable. Walter then puts the Lakers up for sale in under a year. The fastest flip in the history of professional sports in North America that I'm aware of. Come at me in the comments if you got something. He buys at 10. He sells at 12.5. No championships, no arena, no media deal, no valuation changing event. Nothing. He makes $2.5 billion in under 12 months. Okay. That's not an investment. That's an escape hatch. That's like day trading. Okay. That's like swing trading. And the sports business world noticed, you know, Joe Pompliano said, and I quote, "It does seem weird that a guy who owns multiple sports teams would sell the team for a 20% gain in 2 years at the same time he is being investigated for fraud." You know, it's kind of a shocker. Pablo Torre said the collision between Walter's federal investigation and the private equity chaos around FIFA was, quote, a lot. And that brings us to the next part of this story, the part that makes the Lakers sale one of the biggest conflict of interest nightmares in league history. Okay. Recently, Bob Iger and Josh Kushner, the brother of Jared Kushner, who you might be familiar with, purchase a sports governance nightmare, the Los Angeles Lakers. Okay. Let me say that again. Bob Iger, former CEO of Disney, ESPN, ABC, streaming rights, broadcast negotiation guy, now owns the most televised team in the NBA. Okay. This might not look like a conflict of interest because Bob Iger did step down as CEO from Disney in March, so we will never say that that in and of itself is a conflict of interest. However, it is interesting. And then there's Josh Kushner of Thrive Capital, billionaire investor. And here's where the timing gets wild. 2 weeks before Kushner buys the Lakers, Thrive's plan to buy part of FIFA's commercial business collapses in spectacular fashion. UEFA threatens a World Cup boycott. CONCACAF rejects the plan. FIFA executives accuse FIFA President Infantino of deceiving them. The deal falls apart, and 2 weeks later, Kushner buys the Lakers as co-owner. Folks, you go from trying to buy FIFA to buying the Lakers in 2 weeks, you know, that seems more like a pivot and more like, you know, something that it simply is just not coincidental and something that was part of the plan all along. Seems like a massive pivot. The NBA approved the sale pretty much instantly, okay? two massive sales for arguably the league's most important franchise in under a year. No hearings, no transparency, no explanation. The league is acting like the Lakers are, a hot potato, trading asset that nobody wants to hold. And to me, it's the biggest scandal since the Donald Sterling fiasco. It's not really being reported on, but we are. And now we're going to move across the hall. Because if you think the Lakers are a mess, wait until you hear what's going on with the Clippers. And if it hadn't been for all the ownership stuff going on with the Lakers, I would say that the Clippers stuff is probably worse. But from an optic standpoint, I'd have to give that to the Lakers right now. And, particularly before we move across, touching back on the Lakers for a minute, Jeanie Buss, the ownership group that melted down there, the tumultuous relationship with LeBron James. She begrudgingly extended him a couple years ago, didn't feel like he appreciated that they drafted his son, all this stuff, right? And now LeBron James leaves this summer, and then subsequently thereafter, the Lakers get sold again, right? So it's a lot to process in a short amount of time. I want to make it clear that there is no conflict of interest on the surface. I can't say that, okay? All I can say is that it's just really interesting. And when you look at all the players involved, and when you look at the timeline of events that have occurred, it's just impossible for me to not point light at it and ask the question, how did this all happen the way that it did without it really being questioned, and the NBA just kind of sweeping it all under the rug as if it were normal business? And it looks anything, it seems a little fishy to me. And I want to be clear that from a legal standpoint, I'm not saying that anybody did anything wrong or that there are confirmed conflicts of interest. I'm just saying that it's interesting and I have questions. The next topic, the Clippers. Okay, this is actual fraud. Okay, this is where we can actually really get into the meat and potatoes of something that is highly controversial and is a crisis, a full-blown integrity meltdown, as a matter of fact. Okay, so folks, I suppose an argument that could be made that this is the biggest scandal since Sterling, and wouldn't you know that happened with the Clippers. So let's start with the foundation, okay? Aspiration, the company at the center of the mess. It wasn't just a quirky fintech startup, okay? It wasn't a socially conscious banking alternative. It was a criminal fraud operation, okay? Joseph Sandberg, co-founder of Aspiration, pleaded guilty to a $248 million investor fraud scheme. 14 years in federal prison, okay? This is the same company that was paying Kawhi Leonard $28 million for a marketing campaign that never happened. $28 million. No promotional work. No campaign was ever activated. No deliverables. Okay, that's not an endorsement. That's disguised compensation. And here's where the conflict of interest becomes unavoidable. Steve Ballmer, the richest owner in the NBA and possibly even American sports, invests $50 to $60 million in Aspiration, claims that he was conned but he also introduces Kawhi to the company. The Clippers partner with the company for the Intuit Dome. Okay. Folks, you don't get conned and then introduce your star player to the con artist. Okay? The NBA knows this. I think we know it. We're not stupid. Okay? That's why they hired Wachtell, Lipton, Rosen, and Katz, the most feared corporate law firm in America. Okay? They don't investigate sneaker deals. Okay, they investigate billion-dollar misconduct. Aspiration investors sue Ballmer. They claim his investment helped mask the fraud. They claim money funneled to Kawhi. Ballmer, of course, denied it. Moved to dismiss, but the optics, obviously terrible. It's not a surprise that he denied it, okay? I'm sure he's got a massive team of lawyers behind him that are telling him what to do here. And then the trade fallout hits. The Raptors agree to trade for Kawhi. The NBA tells Toronto, you assume the risk of any punishment. Toronto has since hesitated. Masai Ujiri has been gone now. He's in Dallas. And the new front office now inherits this mess. Okay. The part that nobody wants to say out loud, if this were the Timberwolves, the league would have already taken draft picks. But because it's Ballmer, who has an immense amount of power in league circles, is a media rights darling, has all these connections, is essentially, a money machine, or has become a money machine for the NBA. Suddenly this investigation, takes way longer than it should. And to me, it screams incompetency. The NBA just can't get out of its own way after one of the best on-the-court years that I could remember following the NBA. This is all the BS that is currently going on right now, and it's a real shame. We wish that we didn't have to report on something like this. We wish that, things should just go clean and smooth for a league that simply needs to get out of its own way, continue on the growth path that it's on. It's doing a good job with the on-the-court stuff, okay? And let's be honest, this is all on top of all the gambling scandals that are going on, right? We already know about those. Those are well documented. They go back for a long time. All right, the NBA doesn't need any of this right now, but this is simply what it has to deal with. I'm happy to report that we finally have received some fan mail, so we could dig into our mailbag here. This is from John Puccio, and this is in response to the trade deadline episode that we did for Major League Baseball. John says, while I understand why many people immediately reacted negatively after seeing Adley Rutschman dealt to a division rival, I think a D undersells what Mike Elias accomplished. This is looking more like a C+ today with legitimate B+ long-term upside depending on how the prospects develop. The headline move trading Adley Rutschman to Boston was a franchise-altering decision, but an important part of the conversation is 21-year-old Sam Basallo, who was one of baseball's top young catchers already in the majors. His emergence likely made the decision to move Rutschman a bit easier. Through 86 games, this was at the time that John sent this email, Basallo is slashing .241 with 16 home runs and a 1.5 WAR, showing why Baltimore felt comfortable making this move for the long term. But they acquired one of the more intriguing prospect packages moved at the deadline in the Rutschman deal to help the Orioles organization. Anthony Ianson, right-handed pitcher, age 21, now Orioles' number 1 prospect, is also the number 49 overall prospect in the pipeline. Kyson Witherspoon, right-handed pitcher, also 21, now Orioles' number 6 prospect, was the Red Sox 2025 first-round pick, 15th overall. Andy Azakar, center field, age 19, now Orioles' number 7 prospect, along with 3 other right-handed pitching prospects and Alex Hott, Brock, Moore, Harrison, Creeling, all age 22. These 3 right-handed pitchers were all acquired in the Taylor Ward trade sent in from the Seattle Mariners. Carlos Narvaez was in the deal, who will platoon defensively at catcher for Baltimore. That is an important little tidbit. They traded Adley before his contract year, which I think was the best thing they did. Red Sox paid a shiny nickel. However, I think they will be in position again with Gunnar Henderson, who is Boris's client. Henderson will be a free agent at the end of 2028. Will the Orioles trade Henderson this time next year if there is baseball? And John offers a prediction for Henderson. I think now, since the Orioles front office is comfortable with trading within the division, the Yankees will acquire Henderson to pair with George Lombard Jr. on the left side of the infield. All right, a really detailed message for our first message ever in our mailbag. Thank you, John. Friend of the show, family member, cousin John Puccio. So, the first part of this, the prospect haul. Yeah, listen, I never argued with the prospect haul. Thank you for expanding upon it. It definitely solidifies the long-term vision that Elias has for the Orioles. I never questioned the long-term vision. Now, you know, it's easy for me to sit here and say, when they made the trade and they were only a game and a half out, that they were going to make the playoffs, because that's not only the case. What I will say is that you cannot tell me that there was no chance that they were making the playoffs. And I just think that that argument is what I have a really hard time with. You know, you have a chance in an extremely weak American League to make a push, you make it. And that's just where I'm at. I believe in that aspect the Orioles could have made a better decision. And, you know, we still need to remember that they did sign Pete Alonso this last offseason with the idea that they were going to compete in a weak American League. So I certainly understand the long-term vision here. But again, I question everything about this year for the Orioles. Now, the next part, the prediction that John makes, where because the Orioles traded Rutschman within the division to the Red Sox, that the Orioles will then turn around next year and trade Henderson to pair with George Lombard Jr. Well, I have a couple of questions. Number one, what are the Yankees sending the Orioles for Gunnar Henderson? Because Gunnar Henderson is a really, really valuable young player in Major League Baseball right now. So the Yankees aren't just going to be able to acquire him for next to nothing. They're going to have to pay a pretty similar package, I would think, to what the Red Sox just paid. Do the Yankees have the pieces in their system right now, or the major league pieces, to be able to acquire Henderson in that trade without breaking themselves? And then I think the other thing to remember is that, yeah, you know, teams are probably more inclined to listen within the division, but that doesn't mean that they're going to seek out trades within the division. I think it's far more likely that instead of the Orioles just continuing to send talent within their own division, that it's more likely that the talent will be sent outside of the division if they do indeed plan on selling Henderson off. Now, the other question that I would have is, why wouldn't the Orioles do what they could to lock up Henderson, who I believe is an essential part of their team going forward? I mean, they're just going to have a very difficult time selling anything to their fan base going forward if they then turn around next year and sell Gunnar Henderson, and basically close this window before it was ever opened. I have a hard time wrapping my head around that one. But I wanted to thank Cousin John again for our first mailbag segment ever in the history of the 4-League Report. And thank you guys for tuning in to another episode, and we will be back soon with some more coverage of what's going on in Major League Baseball currently in the standings and on the field. And we will, of course, be giving you updates with NFL training camp notes, preseason, all that good stuff. And going to be ramping up things probably within the next month or so to start preparing for both the NBA and the NHL seasons. So with that being said, see you guys next time. Peace.